Chapter 28. When Life Gives You Lemons. Liam stepped into the wreckage that had been the hallway. The raising of the interior walls had left the other members of La Caravana de los Mutilados revealed, sitting in what was left of the office/cells. Something about the commotion had driven the other woebegons away. The spells of despair had lifted. The kids blinked about, taking in the demolition all around them. They looked equal parts dazed and uncertain. Were they waking up from a dream or falling deeper into a nightmare? Hugo began calling to them in Spanish, reassuring them. Mateo did the same. Liam was trying to figure out what exactly had happened. The air was choked with clouds of exhaust and drywall dust. A series of sparks rained down from the ceiling as a fluorescent bulb swung free, its light flickering. The remaining socket gave way so that it fell and shattered on the floor with a firecracker-like pop. Liam and Mitchell beside him jumped. In places, the ceiling had been ripped away completely. The wan light from the bug-choked industrial-sized lamps on the rafters of the ghost box still shone down. Gaps where the office walls had collapsed now opened up to the wider floor. The shelving units and plywood barriers remained, but many were tumbled over from the violence of the truck crashing through. Liam saw one of the paintings of the president's face knocked on its side. He didn't see any other detainees. They likely were still locked in cages. But Liam didn't see any guards either, which was strange. He did hear the sound of other diesel engines, the squeal and hiss of air brakes. Were these trucks rolling in with additional security officers? A SWAT team? The rumble of the engines was growing closer. Liam thought that could not be good. "Come on," Mitchell said, running toward the recycling truck. Without a better idea, Liam followed. "Espere, ya vendremos por ustedes," Mateo said to the members of the caravan. They were already helping one another out of their shattered cells and into the corridor. Some were fashioning improvised crutches from shattered wall frames. Hugo, still carrying his brother, crept up on the truck with Liam and Mitchell. The brake lights on the recycling truck were still on. Liam knew the truck might be their best chance of escaping and carrying all the other kids with the amputations out, but they would need to see if anyone was driving it or if it was just a wild runaway with incredibly fortuitous timing. As they neared, they could hear voices. Liam, Mitchell, and Hugo stumbled through the debris, communicating only in hand gestures as they crept closer. Each picked up a stick or a chunk of concrete, anything they could use as an impromptu weapon to defend themselves, depending on who might be inside. Liam wished Hugo had put Mateo down, but it was too late to argue now. The voices grew louder. They were coming from the cab of the truck, a deep, gruff one, and something melodious, feminine, the tone soft but steady and self-assured. It was foreign-sounding, but somehow familiar. Before Liam could place either voice, the door opened and a figure in billowy purple pants, a matching kukoi wrap, and a vibrant green headscarf stepped out. She swung her sky-blue, rune-covered staff up to her shoulder. "Esmeralda?" Liam and Mitchell said at once. "Hiya, boys!" M'Cauley flapped down from the top of the cab to land on Esmeralda's shoulder. He let out his own squawk of greeting. Mitchell moved in a flash, smashing into Esmeralda, enveloping her in a hug as he had with Liam. The cab door swung open even wider, and a second, familiar, gargoyle-shaped figure tumbled out. "Gerald!" Liam said. To his surprise, he found himself resisting an urge to hug the spiky, scaly demon. "The one and only," Gerald said, taking a small bow. The demon was wearing Liam's own bike helmet. Some of his spikes and horns were still broken off from the fight with the manticore. Others were held in place with black electrical tape. Electrical tape Liam was pretty sure was from his own workshop. But it didn't matter. Liam was glad to see Gerald alive. The demon was wearing a purple shirt 2 sizes too small across his chest so that his belly pressed out beneath it. The green lettering across its front read, "My favorite color is no pants." And the urge to hug Gerald was gone. The noise of the other engines was not more trucks, but buses, charter buses. They rolled right up onto the ghost box floor, likely through the same hole punched in the wall by the recycling truck. They pushed right through the peg and plywood barriers with the ease of snowplows. They came to a stop in the center of the ghost box floor, the brakes hissing. Most of the buses were from private companies, but one was painted with the bold red, white, and blue of the president's very own re-election campaign. His face was rendered in full color on the side, displaying the tough-on-immigration pout scowl that he liked to project at rallies. The logo, Restoring America's Promise, ran in tall white letters down the side panel. The door to the campaign bus opened, but instead of a political operative, Jeannie Winskull leapt out. She was followed by Jax. Both of them were dressed in their best approximation of SWAT chic. Black vests, black cargo pants with black t-shirts that read, Tacticool, in tall white lettering. Their pockets bulged with sets of wire cutters, walkie-talkies, lockpicks, and what looked like flares. Jax carried a giant set of bolt cutters on their back, but set them down to join in a three-way hug with Jeannie and Mitchell. Liam caught up Mitchell, whom he noted can move with lightning speed when it came to embracing his rescuers. "Jeannie! Jax! How did you all find us?" Liam asked, running up. "They might be giants," Jeannie said, her chin still on Mitchell's head. Her eyes, as they met Liam's, looked especially alluring. Maybe it was the lingering effects of the woebegons, or just the dust in the air. "I'm so confused," Liam said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Me too, and I speak for both of us," Mateo said. "Sorry, Liam, I never got to explain." Mitchell extracted himself from the hug to reach into his mouth. From the back of his teeth, close to his molars, he pinched a tiny device that looked like a dental implant. He held it out on his palm for everyone to see. Liam recognized it right away. It looked as if the Lambeth kids and Gerald had helped themselves to more than his bike helmet and electrical tape. "That's one of my clip-on molar mics." Liam had designed the molar mic himself. It was a secret microphone to record or relay the words of the wearer, but it was still just a prototype. He hadn't found a way to make it two-way or really pick up on much more than the wearer's voice. "We took it from your lab when we thought you might go to prison or whatever this place is," Jeannie said. "I hope you don't mind." "Well, if it helped you find us." "Jeannie slapped it into my mouth when we were in the president's office," Mitchell said, his eyes bright with the revelation of a secret plan effectively executed. "I nearly swallowed it. Boy, that would have complicated things." "So, you're not local?" Hugo asked. "No, sorry for that too," Mitchell said. "Jeannie made it clear to me in the president's office that we would use Protocol 3A to communicate in code." "Protocol 3A?" "It's one of the codes we use when unsecure communication channels are being monitored," Jeannie said. She shrugged as if everyone had not just one protocol, but three or more that required a lettering and a numbering system to organize. "Of course," Liam heard himself saying aloud, "because everybody has one of those." "Protocol 3A?" Mateo repeated. "It's the They Might Be Giants protocol. All the key phrases are based on They Might Be Giants song titles," Mitchell volunteered. "They might be giants?" Hugo asked. "This is a band," Mateo followed up. "Only one of the greatest bands of the 1990s, Mitchell replied. "Perhaps of all time." Jax broke into a song in which they crossed their arms over their chest and did a sort of Russian Cossack bounce up and down thing with their legs. Or maybe it was Riverdance? Whatever it was, it really seemed to have nothing to do with the lyrics that Jeannie, Mitchell, and Jax began to sing in unison about Istanbul once being Constantinople, the verses helpfully pointing out that if you had set up a date with a girl in Constantinople, she would now be waiting in Istanbul. Esmeralda had come alongside the boys, shaking her head at her dancing friends. She clicked her tongue. "Wazungani cheesy." "You've never heard of the Might Be Giants either?" Liam asked her. "Nope," Nkali squawked. Liam unsure if it was an endorsement or critique of the others singing and dancing. He sensed critique, but with that bird, you never knew. Mitchell stopped at the end of the chorus. He high-fived Jeannie and Jax, then returned to explaining, "See, since the mic was only one way, I had no idea if Jeannie and Jax were receiving me, so I had to just hope they were. I kept broadcasting what I was seeing to give them clues as to where we were going." "Broadcasting in code, Protocol 3A," Liam repeated, trying to follow. "Exactly," Mitchell said. "But once we tracked you down, we saw how many kids were here and that we'd need help," Jeannie said. "The buses?" Yeah, Officers Torres, Joando, and Chief Light are helping with a bunch of other campus officers. They don't like how you all were treated. Whoa, them? Liam said, his head definitely spinning now. Yeah, them, Jeannie said. Not such a bad bunch of rent-a-cops after all, Jax added. Not to question your approach, because we're grateful you're here and all, but a campaign bus? Mateo asked. All part of the plan, Jack said. Bust in with a recycling truck and then leave it behind. They'd expect as much, a bunch of loony leftist save-the-earth types breaking out migrant detainees. We're playing to type. But then we escape in a convoy of buses, with the campaign bus at the lead. It's absolutely the last place the authorities would think to look for a bunch of migrant kids. The rolling headquarters of a xenophobic, racist president who made cracking down on immigration, family separations, child torture, and sending asylum seekers back to where they came from planks in his platform. As if summoned, Officer Torres, Officer Joando, and Chief Light came running from the direction of the buses. They carried sets of bolt cutters, which they had already used to set free a number of children from the shopping cart cages. All was becoming confusing and chaotic as friends reunited. Able-bodied children helped the amputee children. The campus police officers tried to corral everyone onto the buses, 8 in total, idling in a row. They had trashed most of the detention center walls and partitions on their way in. Debris had collected at their dented fenders. Liam was glad to see Valentine, Leo, and Isadora among the newly freed children. Hey, Liam, Mitchell, good to see you, Officer Joando said. You boys all right? Chief Light asked. The detainee kids craned their heads to look up at him. Yeah, thanks for all this, Liam said, feeling more than a little dumbstruck at the turn of events and the rent-a-cops he viewed as adversaries showing up as rescuers. Sure thing, Chief Light said. He didn't smile. Liam wondered if he ever smiled, but he did wink. You think he'll sign autographs? Mitchell whispered next to him. Liam rolled his eyes. Maybe later, Mitchell. Torres was taking the lead on bus assignments. Jax, Jeannie, we're freeing the other kids. The bus in the far end is already full. We got to move out in 10 minutes. You got head counts? Working on it, Jeannie said. She turned to speak in Spanish as fluent as Mitchell's to Leo and Val. 3 of the just-freed kids had found tasers in the rubble and carried them over to Mateo and Hugo. Liam was cheered to see Izzy was one of them, although he gulped a little when she ran over to hug him, taser in hand. Whoa, Izzy, careful. Cállate, gran idiota, estás bien, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. There were more hugs, high-fives, and handoffs of tasers as more children were released and set to gathering supplies, weapons, whatever they could find. Everyone wanted to arm up before they ran onto the buses. They clearly anticipated more danger and had learned to scavenge when they could. Once she had released Liam, Isadora hugged Hugo and Mateo. I hate to interrupt all these moving reunions, but we need to be going, Gerald said, flapping over from the direction of the recycling truck. Izzy and the other youngest kids froze, eyes wide. It's okay. He's with me, Liam said. And like that, they were all right with Gerald. After all, he wasn't the weirdest thing they had seen in the past 72 hours. Groups of more kids started boarding the buses. Torres was calling out a 5-minute warning. Jeannie, Jax, Val, all the teens and cage captains were not allowing anyone to delay. En el autobús! Rápido! Tenemos suficientes suministros! No esperes! Jeannie called out. Jax was helping too. Their Spanish was not nearly as good as the Winskells, which made Liam feel only marginally less stupid. Despite the injunctions to board the buses, Liam wasn't sure if he should get on just yet. None of the cage captains, his neighbors, or the campus officers had boarded. He felt like he should be helping, but he wasn't sure what else he was supposed to be doing. Gerald, like Liam, appeared to be momentarily sidelined too. He floated over with a water bottle and handed it to Liam. Liam realized just how thirsty he was and nearly finished it in one go. Thanks, Gerald, Liam said, wiping his mouth. You know, you're not so bad after all. For a demon, that is. Gerald gave what was for him a humble nod. Thank you, young sir. I called on you a few times in here, Liam continued. When you didn't come, I thought the worst. I thought that maybe that manticore had really got you. He did, Gerald said, touching one of his horns wrapped in electrical tape, and I was unavailable for a bit while convalescing, but I wouldn't have been able to reach you anyhow. This place has a hex on it. Couldn't have operated inside. Huh, Liam said. These forces of darkness are no joke. You got that right, kid. Liam finished the water. He watched some of the youngest children board a bus, then he regarded Gerald's shirt once more. His mind turned to a different topic. Gerald, I'm pretty sure no pants is not a color on the color wheel. It's from the Lambeth Kid side hustle. I'm trying to support, Gerald said, stretching it out over his belly, making the words even easier to read. Yeah, but maybe you want to conjure up some pants or something before you add indecent exposure to minors to planetary genocide on your rap sheet. Oh, you humans can be so prudish, Gerald said, crossing his arms and turning up his snout. Liam was only half serious, as it didn't seem like demons, or at least this gargoyle manifestation that Gerald favored, had any parts down there. Liam would never have thought of it in the first place had Gerald not displayed such a penchant for shirts that declared he didn't like pants. Nonetheless, Gerald took the hint, or the opportunity. He snapped his fingers so that a kilt appeared around his girthy waist. It was made in a Scottish plaid. A skirt? You and Mitchell should compare notes. He really did like that gown or skirt or whatever. It's so freeing, Gerald said with a shake of the hips. But this is not a skirt, it's a kilt. From the proud clan of MacLeod. A heavy-looking Scottish claymore materialized in Gerald's hand. He raised the sword over his head and cried out in an incomprehensible Scottish brogue, "There can only be one!" When this only elicited a blank stare from Liam, Gerald toned the brogue down by degrees and said, "What? Have you never seen Highlander? Christopher Lambert, Sean Connery, Queen, circa 1984? Ugh, your pop culture references are so dated, Gerald, Jeannie said. She was passing by as she rounded up a gaggle of children. Really? Particle girl? Gerald deadpanned. Particle woman, Jeannie insisted, turning to grab a wayward child so that her bushy ponytail flopped around the side of her head. But point taken. The 90s, which were They Might Be Giants' heyday, were more recent than the 80s, Mitchell added, presumably in his cousin's defense. Mitchell had found a first aid kit somewhere and was placing a Band-Aid on a cut elbow. Cool it, person man, Gerald said, his brogue returning. When you're centuries old, anything after 1975 is recent. Nothing good came from the 70s, Jax groaned, walking past with armloads of packaged snacks from what was left of the cafeteria. I don't want to be a person man. He's pathetic, Mitchell protested. The Particle Man song even says so. I want to be Universe Man. He even beats Triangle Man. You sure he's not local? Hugo asked Liam, his voice a whisper. He also was walking past with a duffel bag stuffed full of blankets taken from the cages. No, I'm not sure. Hey, is there something I can do to help? Should I be, doing something? Liam asked. It appeared everyone had an assignment but him. What did you say about planetary genocide? Mateo asked from his place on Hugo's back. Accidental planetary genocide, the demon said, shaking his sword. Umkali let out an angry squawk as he dodged the oversized blade. Don't wave that around if you don't know how to use it, Shaitani, Esmeralda called, calmly walking back toward the recycling truck, her staff extended out in front of her. Come on, let's get our stuff out of the cab. Liam followed Esmeralda, desperate to be of use to someone. Gerald followed Esmeralda's direction, sheathing his claymore on his back between his wings and waddling along after them. Gerald, were you driving when you all came barreling down the hallway? Liam asked the demon. No, that was Esmeralda. I don't have a license. A what? Wait, Ez driving? But she's blind. Yes, but only Jeannie and I are old enough to have licenses, Esmeralda said over her shoulder. Gerald was my eyes. Which was why I was wearing this, Gerald said, tapping the bike helmet. I've already got enough injuries. I am blind, Shaitani, not deaf. I can hear you. None of this makes any sense. Liam pinched the bridge of his nose. I've told you I'm no Shaitani. I'm not a devil. I'm more a Peppo. Whatever, people, Esmeralda said with a flip of her hand. Well, anyway, Gerald said, clearing his throat and moving to hover at the level of Liam's shoulder. It's not like we didn't want to do some damage to this place, and Esmeralda was the driver for maximum destruction, provided she didn't hit any cages with kids in them. Gerald swooped and dipped, snapping his wings to catch up with Esmeralda. Hugo and Leo had come over to help, but were now looking at each other another dumbly as they tried to piece together the story themselves. She's blind, but she was driving, Hugo said. Yeah, I know it sounds weird, but she kinda manages to get around, Liam tried to explain. She's like Daredevil, Leo said. Sort of, but don't mention the Netflix series to her. It's a sore spot. Something about Daredevil dating some white chick over Rosario Dawson. Oh, I definitely get that, Leo said. What? You do? Liam stopped to look at Leo, wondering if he was joking or not. He wasn't. Yeah, I never liked that snowflake, even when she played Jessica on True Blood, Leo said. She was terrible to Hoyt. Does everyone but me watch these things? Hugo shrugged. Seems like it, brother. You have the coolest friends, Leo said, shaking Liam by the shoulder as if to reassure Liam that he was at least cool by association. Well, they're neighbors, more like, Liam mumbled. But his response was lost as they hurried to catch up to Esmeralda and Gerald. Between Esmeralda's enhanced senses and Gerald's flying, the two of them had gotten well ahead of the three boys. Liam, Hugo, and Leo broke into a jog to catch up. Gerald was just over Esmeralda's head as they closed in on the truck. The demon was about to flap into the driver's seat, but his entry was arrested when the whole of the truck lurched backward. The open door swung wildly and knocked Gerald to the ground. He landed with a loud oof. Macaulay leapt from Esmeralda's shoulder to perch on a ruined office chair. The lammergeier lowered his head, his neck feathers bristling, his eyes fixed on the truck. Something let out a chest-shaking bang just at the front of the cab. The truck jerked backward again. What was that? Hugo asked. Liam had no idea. Esmeralda had gone on alert. Her knees bent and her feet shifted into a fighting stance. Her staff whooshed into place overhead where she began to spin it like a helicopter blade. Her free arm extended so she held just 2 fingers out, as if testing vibrations in the air that only she could sense. A second bang followed, then a third. The truck groaned and wobbled as it skidded out from the wall. Even with the transmission in park and the tires locked, it still moved. Esmeralda spun her staff faster. Liam tried to make sense of what was happening. Had the truck hit a pipe that only now just burst? Had it slipped into gear? Was that the engine that was knocking? A cylinder blowing? A shaft of the drivetrain thrown out of alignment? A fourth bang came, then a fifth, each louder than the last, each gaining in strength. The vibrations rattled down the length of the truck's frame. All the others, cage captains, campus officers, and the like, stopped what they were doing. Even the children were frozen with a curiosity that was morphing to confusion. Hey! What are you all doing over there? Jeannie called out. But no one close to the recycling truck answered her. After one last bang, followed by a bestial "Arr," the truck was juddering backwards, this time without stopping. The tires screeched as they rubbed across the floor. Debris tumbled off its top. Macaulay let out a warning cry and took to the air. The helpful tips for recycling, compost, and electronics disposal began to slide past Liam in reverse, only to shoot away in a lurch as something lifted the truck and flung it several feet in the air. It landed with a crash, seesawing on its suspension. The truck removed. They stared blinking into the crater punched in the wall. Amid the crumbling concrete, twisted rebar, and tangled electrical wires stood Officer Trey. His Cerberus security uniform was ripped and torn. Fragments from his mirrored aviator sunglasses were broken and crushed into his face. His once impressive set of teeth had been reduced to bloody chips hanging from his gums. His limbs were contorted at grotesque angles. One hand was flattened and flopping on the end of his arm. The other was folded backward so that it touched Trey's elbow. A string of smoke appeared to be rising from one of his ears. His head looked screwed on sideways. To look forward, he was forced to stare out of the corners of his eyes. One thigh had a clear kink in it, and one foot pointed 180 degrees backward so that his heel led as he took one shambling step out of the crater, then another. Weirdly, Officer Trey was not bleeding anywhere. His voice came out vigorous, as if the injuries had not taken place at all, almost as if he didn't even feel them. His frustrated tone came more from his uncooperative body than sensations of overwhelming pain. He was speaking that angry language again, the words full of hard vowels and sharp consonants. Liam didn't understand it. No one understood it. No one but Gerald. The demon's eyes went wide. His spikes, intact and taped, stood up from his head all the way down to his tail. He beat his wings together, zipped over to Liam, Leo, Hugo, and Mitchell too, because of course Mitchell had run over, his curiosity always winning out over caution. Gerald, his brogue all but gone, his Scottish cosplay dissolved, only Liam's bike helmet and that ridiculous shirt remaining, started pushing all four of them toward the campaign bus. His face was pure panic. "Go, run, or we're all toast." "How did he survive that?" Mitchell asked. He was incredulous, a scientist who had stumbled across an inexplicable test result. He dragged his feet as he searched for a logical explanation. "Not time for a scientific inquiry," Liam told him, taking hold of Mitchell's arm and tugging. Whatever was going on, he knew it couldn't be good. "No, but really, he should be dead," Mitchell insisted. "He's got multiple fractures, lacerations, and must have some internal hemorrhaging. I mean, look at his skeletal mechanics. He shouldn't even be able to stand like that, much less walk or breathe." "It takes more than a recycling truck to kill a demigod," Gerald said, pulling Mitchell by the collar, his wings a blur with the effort. Now it was Liam's turn to stop. "A what?" Their answer came in a form no one would have guessed, but in retrospect, Liam realized they should have seen it coming all along. Officer Trey, a variation of the word 3. Cerberus security. The senior managing site supervisor of the detention center fell forward onto all fours, his arms and chest swelling, blooming with mounds of glistening muscle which were rapidly covered by sprouting black tufts of fur. His entire body was now smoking. Liam's homework on Greek and Roman mythology from his days of being homeschooled came back to him. "Mitchell, what did your Edith Hamilton readings on Greco-Roman mythology tell you about the giant dog that guarded the underworld?" "Oh dear," was all Mitchell could say. The truth was dawning on him. Something told Liam that Gerald wasn't going to have to continue to drag Mitchell. He'd be ready to run on his own accord. The remnants of the Cerberus security uniform continued to tear and shear away as Officer Trey's arms transformed to forelegs. His shoulders and chest reconfigured into a wall of musculature as tall as a bulldozer. His broken legs reformed themselves into high canine ankles. Long, deep red nails grew with a crackling sound right out of each hand-turned paw. A tail sprouted from his rump, hairless, leathery, and spiked. The chips of the broken aviators fell away along with the unneeded human teeth. Trey's human face turned shades darker, his jaw elongating, his gums rupturing with gouts of yellow fangs. He shook his head. A man clearing his thoughts, or maybe a dog shaking itself dry after a swim. Those eyes, those 3 sets of eyes that had been fighting amid just 2 sockets, opened across this growing head. 3 eyes, 4, 5, then 6. The entire head became a red, black, and yellow blob, like one of those nausea-inducing teratoma tumors, the kind with hair and teeth that Liam had seen in science textbooks and could never look away from out of grotesque, stomach-churning fascination. But then the mess of tissue, bone, and hair resolved into something more canine than human. 3 somethings. The forepaws, with full sets of nails, raked gouges into the floor. The tail snapped like a bullwhip. The 3 dog heads on the smoking body lowered. The ears flattened. The fangs glistened. When they barked, each head sounded as if it had a whole pack of ravenous hellhounds ready to stampede out of its gullet. It was the middle head, the biggest one, the one where the gray eyes had settled into their place, that spoke. It was still using that harsh language of the demons and devils. Whatever it said, it made Gerald redouble his efforts to push and pull them to safety. That middle head smiled, as if amused by escape efforts it found more than futile. A forked snake's tongue flickered out amid its teeth. Liam, Hugo, Mateo, and Mitchell definitely no longer needed encouragement. They were stumbling and falling as they backed away, slipping over the wreckage of the ruined ghost box, the four of them aghast that the three-headed hellhound that was the mythical guardian of the underworld was actually real. Cerberus. Not a man, not a demon, but a demigod. The other two dogheads took eager sniffs of the air, as if detecting the scent of the children's fear. Their green and yellow-brown eyes widened as they located the final children climbing aboard the buses. At the sound of their cries, curtains of drool began to drip from the three mouths and pool on the floor. The two side heads snarled, as hunting hounds might on a fresh trail. Both of them licked their lips with two more forked tongues, more drool dripping from those long yellow fangs. It was the middle head that took no notice of the terrified children. Instead, it lowered its gray eyes to study the lone figure who, inexplicably, hadn't backed away yet. A lone figure that had stubbornly remained in place, her head up, her staff in her hand, her head tilted just so in order that she could study the noises around her. Esmeralda. Something overcame Liam, and he found himself, against all his better instincts, leaving behind the three other boys to make a mad dash to the blind East African exchange student. Surely she couldn't see the monstrosity. Surely she had failed to comprehend the size and shape of the fiend before her. She'd failed to recognize the danger she was in. The horror materialized just a few feet away from her. Liam couldn't stand it. Esmeralda had risked herself to save them. He knew he couldn't abandon her, helpless and blind as she was. "Ez!" Liam called out, skittering to a stop, catching himself on her arm to keep himself from tripping. He tugged on her as Gerald had tugged on Mitchell, only to fall over again as Esmeralda remained rooted in place. "Ez, come on! We got to run!" Whether frozen with fear or indecision, Esmeralda was stiff and immobile as a statue. She might as well have been bolted to the floor. Liam wondered if some spell from Cerberus was causing this paralysis. Would it extend to him? Was he doomed as well? "Come on, Ez, giant three-headed dog, guardian of the underworld, going to kill us!" Liam cried. His feet kept skidding in place as he kept pulling and Ez kept staying. Where was Gerald when he needed him? Liam could feel the hot breath of the three heads blowing on them both. It smelled of sulfur and cigarettes. Shattered ceiling tiles crunched as Cerberus took a step forward. A twisted I-beam squealed as one of the hind legs kicked it aside. The tail whistled through the air, then curled and cracked like a whip. The hot sulfur cigarette wind of the three heads blew Liam's hair into his face. He pushed his bangs up, tugging ever harder at Esmeralda with his free hand. "Ez, come on! Are you all right?" It appeared she was. Esmeralda was not dazed, spellbound, or in some trance. Her features were creased, those jewel-like but unseeing amber eyes wide open. One eyebrow was arched, the other flattened. Her lips pursed in curiosity. Liam could sense Esmeralda was well aware of what she was doing, especially as she pulled her arm free of his grasp. "Come on, Ez! Devourer of souls here!" he tried again. "Devourer of souls? No, I've met him. Put him in his place years ago." "No, I mean three-headed dog. Cerberus." "Three heads?" She shrugged. "That's not so bad." Liam fell back on his bottom. Esmeralda angled her ear toward another shift of Cerberus's feet. Even if unseeing, she was attentive to the monster's every move. "Maybe you should get on the bus, Liam. I don't want you to get hurt," she said, spinning her staff into a blur over her head and behind her back. M'Cauley, as insane as his owner, perched right next to Esmeralda, his wings set to snap into flight. "Ez, you got to go too." Liam's voice was trembling. Esmeralda's feet shifted as she adjusted her fighting stance. "No, I don't," she answered. But you better, Liam. She swung her staff in a Z formation with a whoosh, whoosh, whoosh before resetting it across her body. Mkali leapt to perch on a pile of fallen concrete alongside her, clawing at it the way a bull might when facing down a matador in the arena. The eagle, condor, legging grabber, whatever Mkali was, screeched. It was a ridiculous challenge to the three-headed demigod that was at least 2 stories tall. Both of them are crazy, completely, utterly bonkers. Esmeralda swung her staff again, this time in a wide circle, just short of Cerberus's middle nose, not to hit him, but to let him know she knew exactly where he was. It gave the beast pause. He stopped in his tracks. The 2 flanking heads snapped their attention away from the escaping children, their next meal, to the blind East African exchange student ninja assassin standing between them and the satiation of their hunger. "Ah, yes, I know exactly where you are," Esmeralda said in a warning to the demigod. Then she did something Liam truly didn't understand. She closed her eyes. What little sight she might have had was blacked out completely now. She'd definitely lost her mind. Liam was certain of it now. But if this deeper blindness bothered her, Esmeralda didn't betray it. The lines of her face went smooth. She was the picture of serenity, as if drawing on a deep well of Zen calm from within. Liam had no explanation for it, even as her lips parted in a smile. Her tone was surprisingly light as she said, "Liam, take note. New t-shirt idea for the Life Lemon series." Esmeralda inclined her head toward Cerberus and launched her staff into a propeller spinning motion once more. All 3 heads answered her bravado with deep, booming growls. "Are you listening, Liam?" Yeah," he answered, still on his butt. Esmeralda repositioned the staff once more, this time spinning it out to graze the nose of the left side head. It had inched just a bit too close. She made it pay with a whack. All 3 heads went silent, their ears back as if surprised by Esmeralda's accuracy. In the beat that followed, Esmeralda added, "When life gives you lemons." Her tone had shifted back into something deadly serious. "You burn life's house down." Chapter 29. Ninja, Hellhound, Meet Cute. Cerberus lunged forward, 3 snarling, snapping, ravenous mouths full of sulphurous wind and long fangs. The massive, muscular body moved with supernatural speed. In a blink, the demigod transformed from poised to strike to a rushing storm of hellhound fury. But Esmeralda was fast, faster even, her movements fluid. Her first reaction was defensive in nature. She evaded the 3 heads and their slavering mouths, ducking and rolling to her left, timing her escape from the right head by a hair's breadth. She twisted her body like an Olympic gymnast in a floor routine, flowing from somersault into a spring and then into a midair twist. It preserved her momentum with frightening efficiency. The staff of bluish wood, the runes glowing, extended out from the spinning axis of her body. It caught the rightmost head with a solid strike on its tender nose. It caused, at least that head, to yelp like a puppy. It raised a paw to its face, even as the other 2 heads grew angrier, snapping in Esmeralda's wake. Esmeralda landed atop an overturned set of shelves. Her evasion had turned into a counter-strike faster than Cerberus liked. He recovered and surged forward. Esmeralda flipped over all 3 heads, high enough that she cleared Cerberus's raised left paw as it came down on the shelving unit. His nails sliced through the metal with the ease of a knife through wet tissue paper. But she was long gone. Esmeralda alighted on the ridge of the monster's back, danced toward his haunches, all but expecting the swipe that came from his tail. She pole-vaulted off the demigod's rump with such force that his hindquarters buckled. As she dropped to the ground, Esmeralda appeared to be dancing on air. When she landed, she rolled to disperse her momentum and came up running. She headed for the center of the ghost box, seeking a more open arena for this match. She was drawing Cerberus away from the buses full of children. "That sister is like a ninja," Hugo said, having come over with Mitchell to help Liam up from where he had gracelessly fallen on his butt in his failed attempt to rescue Esmeralda. Like a ninja? No, she is a ninja, Mitchell corrected, grunting as he lifted Liam up under the arms. Umkali swooped down. His talons locked onto Esmeralda's shoulders, and he lifted her into the air, taking her farther into the more open part of the ghost box. It was the most advantageous ground to confront their enormous adversary. Officers Torres, Joando, Chief Light, and some other campus police whom Liam didn't know were rushing the last of the released kids onto the buses. But no one could ignore the enormous three-headed demigod hellhound rampaging through the partitions, smashing the three-toned portraits of the president with his errant swipes as he went. Nor could they take their eyes off the East African exchange student who continued to evade him. Umkali dropped Esmeralda atop the rows of shopping cart cages on the far wall. She ran along them, each barefoot perfectly placed to give her the purchase to remain just clear of Cerberus's teeth and claws. He continued to smash and destroy his company's own detention cells in a fruitless pursuit of his prey. When Esmeralda reached the end of one cage, she would somersault to the next. If the gap was too wide, Umkali was there to carry her safely across. The two of them worked in perfect synchrony. As a result, Cerberus's frustration only grew. At each turn, he was left snapping and swinging at empty air. His fury was immense, and he was left with just the walls, shelves, and presidential portraits to take it out on. "She's leading him away so we can escape! Subanse a los autobuses!" Torres said, alternating between Spanish and English in an effort to get the last of the kids on board. Even so, Jeannie, Jax, Leo, Valentine, and Izzy did the opposite, running over to where Hugo, Mateo, Mitchell, and Liam were watching. They were all spectators, unable to tear themselves away from the unfolding drama, not the least of which because they didn't know how it would end. With the cages all empty and the final children climbing into the buses, the campus officers were mounting the steps themselves to leap behind the wheels and close the bus doors. "Come on, kids!" Torres called out. Her cries went unheeded. Liam thought it was obvious they couldn't afford to have this beast charging after them. The others gathered around him all knew it. As if to answer anyone who dared to think it, although Liam imagined no one was, Jeannie added, "We're not leaving without Esmeralda!" But even if this was the endgame, Liam couldn't guess how it might resolve. Despite Esmeralda's ability to evade, Liam wasn't sure how long she could postpone the inevitable. She was quick, brave, smart, and she had Umkali, but Cerberus was a demigod, and she was blind. That didn't seem to slow her, though. Cerberus continued to lunge. Esmeralda pirouetted left, then right, landing more strikes. First to the left head, just over the eye, then on the right, jamming closed its jaw so that it bit its own tongue. This enraged right head even further. Cerberus managed to anticipate Esmeralda's next evasion just enough to score a gash in her leg. He tore open the cuff of her loose-fitting pants. She bled, but it wasn't clear how badly or if it slowed her, yet. Cerberus grew overconfident after that, leaping forward for a follow-up attack. But Esmeralda pole-vaulted on the snout of the middle head, using its opening jaws to add spring to her motion. She twisted in midair and landed on Cerberus's neck. When the right head turned to look, she met it with such a series of blows from either end of the staff that Cerberus's only way to stop it was to buck her off like an angry bull. He swung his own compact haunches up from behind him. Like a truck jackknifing, he struck her with his hip. This sent Esmeralda in an uncontrolled tumble. It left her skidding along the floor, plowing debris in front of her and clearing a path in the wreckage as she slid. Umkali dive-bombed Cerberus's heads to buy her time. It was not needed. Esmeralda sprang back up, lifting her staff from the floor with her foot, catching it just in time to pole vault away again, avoiding Cerberus's follow-up strike. She landed on the edge of a plywood wall, balancing on its narrow edge like a tightrope walker. She somersaulted off it just as Cerberus's claws came down on it, shredding another likeness of the president's face. The length of the plywood wall ran out. Umkali swooped in and lifted Esmeralda back up to a row of shelves. This was less a fight now and more a flight as Cerberus chomped and clawed one shelving unit after another in pursuit of Esmeralda. She kept running and kept evading. The shelving units ran out. Esmeralda was running down the length of the last one. Cerberus picked it up in his forepaws, tilting it back toward himself, forcing Esmeralda to run uphill to avoid falling back into his 3 snarling mouths. When she didn't slow, he shook the shelves, sending loose parts, bolts, screws, torn metal, up in a cloud of metal bits. Esmeralda did lose her footing now, but she steered herself into a fall down off the side of the unit instead of back toward the 3 mouths. Even this fall she turned into a counter. Foregoing a chance to break her fall, Esmeralda instead twisted in the air, a baseball player in 0 gravity. She swung the bat of her staff to connect with one of the largest fragments falling alongside her. Out of all of them, somehow, she had found the largest. It was a chunk of severed steel with jagged edges. She sent it spinning shuriken style right into the face of the middle head. It sliced through the air, struck Cerberus's left eye, and lodged there with a sickening pop, splat, thud. A direct hit. The middle eye had exploded. Middle head shuddered violently. Left head looked on, stupefied, while the right directed a tirade of angry barks at Esmeralda. The noise was ear-splitting, and the children covered their ears. But the barks were only that. Noise. With the middle head dazed, the entire body was stumbling. No immediate counterattack came, but the maneuver had come at a cost. Esmeralda did not have time to catch herself, so she landed gracelessly, belly flopping on the floor with a smack and a cry that was cut short as the breath got knocked out of her. Esmeralda was slow to get up, and now she was weaponless. Liam had lost track of where her staff had landed, and Valentine had lost track of Izzy. "¿Dónde está Izzy?" "Dios mío," Mateo gasped. "She is over there." Already too far for any of them to reach her, Izzy was out in the open in a full sprint. She was climbing, jumping, rolling, a quick learner from observing Esmeralda if there ever was one, and she was closing the distance between her and a stunned Esmeralda. "Izzy!" Valentine cried. Hugo set Mateo down. Mitchell picked him up while Hugo chased Izzy. A pain shot up Liam's arm as if it were crushed in a vise. It wasn't a vise. It was Jeannie grabbing him, perhaps not even knowing she had done so. Her other hand was clenched in a white-knuckled fist set to her mouth. "Oh God, oh God, oh God," she said. Cerberus was recovering, but not a single one of his 3 heads, or, now 5, eyes, had yet to take notice of the 2 figures closing on Esmeralda. Izzy, followed by Hugo. The entirety of the demigod's being was trained on Esmeralda alone. She leaned on a flipped table as she righted herself, tilting her head to study the 2 sets of footfalls nearing her. Mkali flew a protective circle about her, cawing as Cerberus approached. Somewhere in the mess of broken chairs, crashed tables, bent cafeteria trays, and shattered shelving, Izzy had found Esmeralda's staff. She realized she would never reach Esmeralda before the now galloping Cerberus. Instead, Izzy hurled it, javelin style. "Aquí! Reina Guerrera!" Esmeralda's hand shot out. It was still so strange to see her do so without turning to look, but the toss of the thrower was true. The staff came home to Esmeralda's outstretched hand, and she caught it as if it had always belonged there. "Asante! Simba Mdogo!" With that, Esmeralda rushed forward to meet the demigod, Mkali in her wake. No leaps, no jumps, no pole vaulting. Perhaps she was tired, perhaps this was a new higher-risk strategy, but Esmeralda met the 3 heads and snapping jaws head-on. She engaged Cerberus, this time in close combat, batting the heads away with solid strikes and shuddering blocks. With her feet planted, Esmeralda held out long enough to frustrate one head, then the other. Mkali added his own complications with threatening swipes of his talons and pecks of his beak at the monster's 5 remaining eyes. Even though she scored more direct hits and strikes that left the heads dazed and slow to respond, Esmeralda was still outnumbered. Not 3-1, but 5-1, as now the 4 legs were close enough to take multiple swipes at her. A few times they landed blows with terrible effectiveness, leaving gouges in her staff at best and rents in her body at worst. Esmeralda was bleeding now from cuts through her shoulder, one in her back and another through her headscarf and across her scalp. A backhand from one of the paws sent her hurtling into a set of shelves. They tumbled end over end from the impact. "Ez!" Jeannie and Jax cried out. No, Liam heard himself say. Esmeralda recovered, her nose and lip bleeding just in time to meet Cerberus's fresh attack. She fired more debris baseball bat style, plucking the junk from the ground with her feet and toes. Umkali suffered a hit from the snaking tail that sent him crashing to the floor. It took him time to shake it off and left Esmeralda on her own. Cerberus slowed, but he didn't stop. He did not want to lose another eye, so he took more time to duck or swat the projectiles Esmeralda batted in his direction. The demigod kept coming. Esmeralda was running out of pieces of debris to launch. Each projectile was growing smaller, lighter, and less deadly. When an empty milk carton hit his forepaw, the last of the ammunition Esmeralda could find within reach, Cerberus's middle head smiled, recognizing that this last strike was nothing more than a feint. Esmeralda had exhausted her options.
Hey, ndio wote ambao umesalia kipande kidogo.
Cerberus growled, apparently fluent in any language his victims might speak. Esmeralda, with no more missiles to hurl, set her feet, held up her staff, and waited for the monster. She had shattered and bent shelves on either side of her. This covered her flanks, but gave her no place to run. Cerberus stalked in closer. All three heads sniffed the air, anticipating a meal. Umkali, recovered, was unable to distract him, even ripping and tearing into the flesh on the demigod's back with his talons. The muscles along the length of the monster's body tensed, the rear legs folded like giant springs, ready to leap. But his attack was arrested. A second figure leapt down from the fallen shelves. He dropped down onto the very top of Cerberus's right head. He was ridiculously small in comparison to the monster, but before Cerberus knew what or who it was, Hugo had wrapped his legs around the demigod's neck like a bull rider at a paranormal rodeo. It allowed Hugo to keep his hands free. Both were holding tasers. He stabbed one into each eye. The voltage was not enough to convulse the whole of the demigod, but the hellhound did freeze. The other two heads vibrated with the shock of 10,000 volts to the eye sockets of the rightmost head, their teeth clacking. The paralysis of the other heads could not compare with the agony of the right. It let out nothing less than a pained squeal, which devolved into a whine, then a whimper, as the eyes exploded, melted, and sizzled away. The right head's tongue lolled out over his fangs. The neck muscles tensed, then went slack as the tasers discharged their last volts. The weapons sputtered and sparked before going dark, their batteries flatlined. The air stank of burnt flesh. As right head fell forward, middle and left tried to recover. The body stumbled first sideways, then backward. As Cerberus came to from the shock, he began to shake himself. The right head remained limp, but the motion was enough to throw Hugo off. He never hit the floor. Cerberus saw to that. The hound rallied his strength and swatted Hugo with a foreleg. The force was such that Hugo's body cartwheeled in the air until he hit a column. It was a concrete roof support. He impacted with such a bone-jarring thud, his head rocking back, his muscles gone loose, that Liam feared the worst. He was running over to Hugo with Leo, Valentine, and Izzy before he knew it. Mitchell, despite Mateo's cries from his back to also run out and help Hugo, held his ground, hiding behind a fallen rafter. Mitchell knew that, encumbered with Mateo, he'd only complicate things, and Liam, Valentine, Leo, and Izzy were almost there. But they all needed to be moving toward the buses, not away. Even if the buses were too far from where Hugo had landed, the recycling truck wasn't. Mitchell made a break for it instead. "Take Hugo to the recycling truck!" he yelled, taking Mateo with him. Valentine, Leo, and Izzy would be enough people to help Hugo. Right now, Esmeralda needed a hand. That left Liam. He ran up alongside Cerberus, picked up a chunk of concrete, and screamed out a series of very non-PG curse words his father definitely would have objected to. Liam didn't care. He knew he had to get Cerberus's attention to distract him enough to give Esmeralda an opening. The demigod was even larger up close than Liam had imagined. Liam hurled the chunk of concrete with enough force that it struck the monster on its right flank. Liam wasn't sure if the beast would even see him, since the right head was hanging down as if already dead. The rock, a pebble really compared to Cerberus, was enough. The monster turned, the two remaining heads terrifying enough even without the third. Both sniffed the air, taking in Liam's scent.
Oh, it's the half-breed,
the middle head snarled. This wasn't like the movies at all. Liam had nothing clever to say. Anything that came to mind, pick on someone your own size, for example, was woefully inappropriate, since Liam's head barely cleared the space between the demigod's knees. As the two heads with the remaining 3 eyes locked in on him, all Liam could do was swallow the lump in his throat, definitely the size and texture of a scratchy old tennis ball, this one. He noted a constricting feeling in his bladder. That drink Gerald had brought him was about to offload whether he liked it or not. Wetting one's pants was something Liam was certain was not very badass, nor was the feeble, hey! He managed to squeak out with a stupid wave, his fingers wiggling like some pathetic half-hearted attempt at jazz hands. So definitely not badass. The middle head let out a stream of hot breath, the forked tongue snapping in and out as Cerberus said,
"Your time's up too, you little runt."
If this was Liam's turn to be heroic, he was out of tricks. He was out of one-liners, and he was about to be out of piss. All he managed was a pitiful eep as his breath caught in his throat. This, he realized, made him sound all the more like the squeak toy Cerberus probably saw him as. And, like a squeak toy, he had distracted the monster, who smiled, welcoming this turn of events. Liam was a delightful new toy to bite, a new human to crush, another new soul to devour. It was just the diversion Esmeralda needed. She darted in from Cerberus's left flank to rain down such a storm of blows on the left head that the wounded, disoriented Cerberus was suddenly rendered dumb. Tripping and falling sideways, the beast had zero opportunity to counter, only cower. And cowering didn't help him. Esmeralda's strikes were unrelenting. Cerberus backpedaled now, missing his footing repeatedly. This only served to drop his heads lower into Esmeralda's deadly range. More pummeling. Spit, fangs, blood went flying as the clobbering continued. Esmeralda was justice embodied. Her fury overcame her injuries, her fatigue, her sense of self-preservation. She drove the demigod backward. The left head fell further down. It drooped as if drunk. It grew limp and lifeless. Like the right head, the left head was now a furry, bloody punching bag. And Esmeralda continued to bash without mercy. Cerberus ran out of space. With his tail tucked between his legs, he had not registered the wall Esmeralda had backed him into, not until his rump bumped up against it. That was when Esmeralda delivered one last over-the-head hammer strike to the left head. This last blow was so powerful, it put a dent in left head's skull. A dark, glittering fluid spilled out of the crater. Ichor. It poured out of Cerberus. It was not silver gold as Gerald's had been, but a dark, iridescent blue-black, as if reflective of Cerberus's corrupted heart. Esmeralda had put such heft into the last swing that the shaft of her staff, which had held up until now, snapped, leaving her holding a half that narrowed to a jagged point while the other end broke free, soaring up into the rafters. Either in an attempt to seize upon a perceived weakness, now that her staff was shattered, a last desperate defense, or both, Cerberus's remaining middle head plunged. His mouth was open to its widest, his fangs glistening as they descended to maul Esmeralda and swallow her whole. But Esmeralda was ready for this. She still had the shorter half of her staff in her hands with its broken spear-point end. She stabbed that point upward, driving the sharp tip into the red exposed roof of Cerberus's mouth. The pain stopped Cerberus, his panicked howl cut short as Ez jabbed the staff fragment deeper with the heel of her left hand. It popped out, a splintered spike between the monster's ears. The remaining eye went wide. Cerberus couldn't close his mouth lest he drive the staff fragment even deeper. He instinctively drew back, lifting his head away from the attack and critically exposing his neck, playing right into Esmeralda's trap. Esmeralda stuck out her right hand just behind her back, her palm upturned, the calloused pad waiting in the air, a springy platform where the second half of the broken staff, its kinetic energy dispersed, returned from its flight to the ceiling. It landed with a soft clap. The remaining piece of the staff had come home. Esmeralda twirled it, giving it just enough momentum before she drove it through Cerberus's neck. She let out her own primal cry as she delivered the death stroke. The demigod winced. More ichor geysered out in a flume. Then the monster collapsed in a heap, a gust of wind and last breaths sending up clouds of dust as his essence bled out of him in indigo ripples. Liam ran up, just shy of the newly dead corpse. It already looked to be dissolving into a dark miasma, spreading out on the floor before fading, as if draining down into the invisible underworld from whence it came. Ez, you all right? Liam was close enough to touch what was left of the monster, but avoided doing so. Instead, he reached for Esmeralda. She took his hand in hers as she stepped out from between the melting forelegs, the gesture more for human contact than any need for balance. Yeah, thanks for the help, Liam. Don't mention it. Before they started for the recycling truck, Esmeralda brushed the end of her staff that was still sticking out from the slain monster's neck. Is it worth trying to take it? Liam asked her. No, its power is spent, she said, her voice uncharacteristically sad. Her mouth trembled before she turned to the truck. It served us well and had a noble end. Umkali landed on her shoulder, nuzzling her while she stroked his breast feathers. He let out a cooing sound that was part mournful, part relief. Thank you, Umkali. You did well. A true warrior and friend. Ez, that was... I don't know how to even... You can give me the replays later, she said. Umkali fluttered off again toward the cab of the recycling truck. Esmeralda followed, some spring returning to her step. Did any of you knuckleheads get your phones out to film that? No. Too bad. Would have been great for my highlight reel. Ez, I think you're crazy. Crazy awesome. Wait until you see me drive. Chapter 30. Fruit Prayer. Despite her bluster, Esmeralda stumbled as she and Liam ran over to the cab of the recycling truck. The pain in her calf, shoulder, and other injuries was finally catching up to her. Liam didn't hesitate to wrap an arm tightly around her waist to steady her. They came alongside Valentine, Izzy, and Leo as they carried Hugo among them. Esmeralda? You were amazing, Leo said. Thanks. What about Hugo? Hugo's eyes were barely open, but at the sound of her voice, he gave a trembling thumbs up. Hugo couldn't have done it without you, Esmeralda said, reaching over to touch his hand. Thank me later, Hugo managed to croak out. Valentine, Leo, and Izzy lifted Hugo into the back seat of the truck cab. Mitchell and Mateo were already waiting inside. They took the hand off and made Hugo as comfortable as they could. As Valentine, Leo, and Izzy got in, Hugo began to cough up blood. Liam knew that wasn't good. He looked out the window to see Jeannie was in the driver's seat of the nearest bus. Officer Torres was in the next. The idling engines revved. Detainee kids were pressed up against every inch of the windows, hoping for a glimpse of Hugo, looking for some sign he was all right. Mateo, normally in tune with all the other kids, was focused solely on his brother. Está bien, Hugo. Está bien. Vas a estar bien. Gerald was in the front seat, securing his helmet and checking the buckle beneath his chin. Esmeralda belted herself in behind the steering wheel. She groaned as she pulled the belt down across her shoulder. Liam realized that, with the exception of Mateo, every backseat passenger was staring at Esmeralda aghast. No one could believe she was going to drive, but no one wanted to cross her either after what they had seen she could do. Ez, you really want to drive? Liam asked. Anyone else know how? She replied. Liam wasn't sure what to say. A car being a purchase far beyond his resources, he'd never bothered to even apply for a permit. I do, Ez. I have my learner's permit, Mitchell said. What? Mitchell, you're 13, Liam began to say. How do you have... I hacked the DMV server, Mitchell said, as he switched places with Esmeralda, much to the relief of the other passengers, even if the wheel was wider than Mitchell's body and his permit was legally and ethically questionable. As Mitchell looked down, he frowned. Uh-oh, I can't reach the pedals.
I got it, Gerald said, scrambling down beneath the dash. I can work the gas and the clutch. You get the steering wheel.
I'll take the gear shift, Esmeralda said, leaning over the stick running up from the floor.
You'll work the gas, the clutch, and the brake, right, Gerald? Liam asked, noting that Gerald had not mentioned that pedal. We won't need brakes where we're going, Gerald hollered up from below.
Valentine, Leo, and Izzy each crossed themselves and pulled on their seatbelts. Mitchell turned the engine over. The 3 drivers grinded the gears and stalled out the moment they tried backing up.
Oops,
Mitchell said, his shoulders up to his ears. Try again, Esmeralda said. A buzzsaw-like wail came from just outside the cab. Through the spider-webbed windshield, Liam could see a heavy-duty rescue drone. Its serpentine shape flew by, flapping a set of wings mounted with 4 turbines each. The landing clamps on its rear and rescue arms on its front were like limbs. Its rescue winch tail and reticulated forward sensor array head completed its resemblance to a bionic dragon, not to mention the letters DRAGON running down its length. Liam knew DRAGON stood for Drone Rescue Apparatus with Global Orientation Network. After all, he had designed, crafted, and named it. The Dragon's turbines tilted so it hovered on level with them on the driver's side now, stirring up little eddies of dust from the floor outside. A voice crackled over the truck's CB. Standing by for escape route guidance. Liam had never been so glad to hear that voice. Ian, Liam said. Mr. Liam, it is good to see you, the dragon said, with a mechanical wave and nod of its head. The AI had foregone his usual dragonfly configuration, trading it in for the more durable dragon rescue drone. Liam kept it charged in the lab for emergencies, and this was definitely an emergency. Where have you been, Ian? I was assigned to surveillance, Mr. Liam, Ian said. He's supposed to find our way out, Esmeralda said. Got any suggestions, fruit fly? Affirmative. Considering the amount of structural damage already done to the premises and the compromised integrity of the wall directly ahead of you, the horsepower in this vehicle, taking into account some decline considering its make and model year, and the high gear-to-axle ratio of this particular transmission, I calculate with 95% confidence that there remains sufficient torque. Different bodies, same old Ian, Liam thought, exasperation and affection mixing in his heart. English, buzzbomb, English, Esmeralda snapped. Oh, yes, well, given the present conditions and the alignment of various variables, reversing might not be necessary, at least in this particular set of circumstances. Now he's getting on my nerves, Gerald shouted from below the dash. Well, that's nothing new, Mitchell said. Man, I need to work on those language compressors, Liam noted before jumping in. Ian, spit it out. 3 words or less. Floor it, the AI said, adding, I believe that is the colloquial expression. Through that wall? Straight ahead? Mitchell asked. Affirmative. Well, why didn't you just say that, Buzzy? Esmeralda said, shifting the gears. The pedals thunked as Gerald worked the clutch and punched down on the accelerator. They all fell back hard against the seats. The wall loomed up to fill the windshield. Mitch, the wheel! The wheel! Oh yeah, thanks, Liam, Mitchell said, seizing it before it turned further. He straightened the truck out, steering them on an even more direct course for the wall. Liam could hear the engines of the charter buses redline and glimpsed them briefly as they lined up behind the truck. That was all Liam saw before Mitchell homed in on the wall. He leaned over the wheel, his wild frock of rusty hair bouncing with each bump of the truck, a considerable amount falling down in front of his eyes. He is about as blind as Esmeralda. That was all Liam could think. His train of thought was interrupted by Mitchell crying out from beneath his bangs, clutching the wheel, and warning everyone in the cab, Hold on! This is going to be just like Buckaroo Banzai! Although the reference was lost on Liam and likely most of the passengers, they had enough context to know what to do. Everyone grabbed, leaned into, held on to whatever they could in the cramped truck cab. Mitchell puffed out a stream of air to clear the hair out of his face. His eyes grew big as he said, Wow, that came up fast. but his voice was drowned out as he drove head-on into the wall. Recycling truck became battering ram became wrecking ball. The occupants were thrown forward as the truck made contact with the wall. Everything was a cloud of choking dust, exploding concrete, and splintering timber. Aluminum flashings spun about outside and flattened against the windshield. No sooner had it all cleared than they were staring down a fast-approaching wall of chain-link fence. "We're through!" Liam yelped. The impact had slowed the truck, the engine sputtering and threatening to stall again. "Downshift! Downshift!" Esmeralda cried. "Shifting, shifting," Gerald said from the well. Esmeralda heaved the gear shift backward. The frame of the truck jerked. The engine belched. The gears found purchase. The drivetrain roared. Mitchell let out a small whoop. The truck began to accelerate again. The first fence came down in a crash. The chain link and razor wire began to drag along the undercarriage. An apron skirt of sparks erupted around the recycling truck's chassis. "More gas! More gas!" Mitchell said, wrestling the wheel. He was a skipper fighting the ship's wheel in a hurricane. A green laser light sliced down from just over the cab. It came from an aperture on Ian's head. He adjusted so that a baseball-sized target hovered just ahead of them. "Drive toward the beam, Mr. Mitchell. I have surveyed the fences and will direct you to the sections where they are weakest." Umkali was flapping alongside Ian. Liam noted with pride that the bionic dragon was keeping up well with the lammergeier, even with millions of years of evolution and countless generations of earlier designs on the latter's side. "That eczema inbred anal nerdwad nuisance might prove himself useful for a change," Gerald grunted from below. Liam snatched up the CB mic. "Jeannie? Jax? You there?" Jax and Jeannie both answered. "Yep." "We copy you." "Then follow us." "On it." In the side view mirror, Liam saw the campaign bus emerge from the cloud of dust that had enveloped the collapsed wall behind them. Jeannie swung left to track behind the recycling truck, running through the first line of destroyed fencing. The other buses were following like a row of train cars locked up to a locomotive. "What about the guards?" Valentine asked from the back seat. Ian must have heard her. He replied on the CB. "I broadcast a warning that there had been an outbreak of a hybrid strain of hemorrhagic leprosy, Ebola, hantavirus, hepatitis, bird flu. All Cerberus security personnel are to remain 300 yards away from anyone emerging from this facility, no matter what happens." "Ian, you lied?" Liam's brain was exploding. Everything he knew about the AI's programming told him it was impossible for Ian to relay anything that wasn't aligned with his observations of reality. He was supposed to be incapable of lying. "I chose to classify it as a social experiment, a simulation of sorts. Categorized as such, my ethics protocols did not object," Ian said. Liam leaned back against his seat. He stared ahead, but his eyes were unfocused. Ian was evolving in ways even he had not anticipated. Yes, the AI had lied, but he had done so to rescue hundreds of vulnerable children, not to mention his friends. A complex, human-like decision process that broke from his original coding but was still supported by sound ethical justification. "Brilliant," Mitchell said, yanking the wheel to the side, content enough that Ian had cleared the guards out of their way and less concerned on what this meant for his level of general intelligence or breakthroughs in machine learning. The CB crackled again. This time, it was Jeannie. "Hey, Ez, new idea for the Life Lemon series." Esmeralda grabbed the mic down. "Hit me. When life gives you lemons, drive a truck through it." "Woohoo, I like it. It's a keeper." Mitchell shouted that he liked it too, jerking the wheel again and bouncing in his seat as he smashed them through a third and fourth series of fences. Esmeralda was sharing her burn life's house down idea with Jeannie and Jax on the CB. Mitchell punched the air. "Ooh, I like that one too." "Mitchell, both hands!" Liam cried, steadying himself with a hand pressed against the roof of the cab as he moved into the back seat to check on Hugo. Leo was staring at him agog. Valentine asked outright, not bothering to lower her voice, "Who are these people, Liam?" My neighbors? They're T-shirt entrepreneurs too," he offered, as if that were somehow a helpful explanation. But Liam wasn't overly concerned about providing one just then. He was more concerned about Hugo. The elder Nolesko brother didn't look good. Izzy was wedged between the front seats and the back, helping to hold Hugo still as they crashed through one barrier after another. Mateo did the same, employing his arm and stump as best he could. Valentine looked on, helpless. Liam, too. Leo wiped his eyes. Hugo's breathing was ragged and uneven, one moment fast and panting, the next slow and rattling. His teeth were pink with blood, and he was spitting up a great deal more as he continued to hemorrhage internally. His blood was on Izzy and Valentine, staining their hands and shirts red, but Mateo most of all. No one bothered to look forward to brace themselves for the next collision. Their world had shrunk down to the rear of that truck cab. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else existed. Mateo was still comforting his brother. Está bien, está bien. Lo siento, Teo. Siento no haber podido protegerte. Lo hiciste, siempre lo has hecho. Hugo coughed again and reached to take his brother's 2 fingers and thumb. What are they saying? Liam asked Valentine. She began to translate. Those things, those ghosts, they couldn't hurt you, Hugo said. Guess because I knew we've been through worse, and even the worst can turn out for the good. Troubles can be blessings, Hugo managed to whisper, repeating his brother's favorite saying. Yeah, Mateo said, his eyes tearing. You're my hope, little brother. You've always been the best of us. You're going to do great things. Hugo, we're going to do great things together. You're not going anywhere. Hugo's eyes opened just enough to show they were beginning to unfocus. His voice was jagged. The prayer, the fruit one. Say it, please, Teo. Mateo's resolve broke and he began to weep. Lacking the fingers to smooth his brother's hair, he tried with his bare stump. Liam had never seen the stump without a sleeve covering it. Now his gut twisted at the sight of it. It was a tangle of scars and flesh, patched together from so many stitches, staples, and surgeries, all of it evidence of the pain Mateo had endured. And to still say troubles are blessings, no wonder the woebegones couldn't break him. Izzy moved in to help Mateo, gently clearing Hugo's bangs from his face so the brothers could see one another. Now, faced with the hardest loss of his life, Mateo mastered himself to recite a prayer for his brother. Liam remembered Hugo had mentioned something about a prayer found in the clothes of a dead child found at Ravensbrück concentration camp. Was that the fruit prayer? The last words Hugo wished to hear? Words of forgiveness, even for their enemies, their jailers, his own killers? Liam couldn't imagine holding any such forgiveness in his heart for the likes of Officer Trey, or any of his lackeys. Perhaps Hugo couldn't either. But maybe it was enough that Mateo could. My little brother keeps the faith for both of us. Valentine kept translating as Mateo recited the prayer to Hugo. Her voice was breathless and choked in Liam's ear. Oh Lord, remember not only the men and women of goodwill, but also those of ill will. The truck rolled over something and they all were jostled about. Mateo kept up. So did Valentine. But do not remember all of the suffering that they have inflicted upon us. Instead, remember the fruits we have borne because of this suffering. Our fellowship, our loyalty to one another, our humility, our courage, our generosity, the greatness of heart that has grown from this trouble. Mateo stroked his brother's cheek with his ruined hand. Valentine's voice broke as she continued to translate. When our persecutors come to be judged by you, let all of these fruits that we have borne be their forgiveness. Our fruits, Hugo rasped. Valentine's translation diminished into sobs after that, her head falling against Liam's shoulder. He reached his arm around her. Izzy was stretched over Mateo, who was stretched over Hugo, one brother alive, one dead. With his 2 intact fingers and his thumb, Mateo closed his brother's eyes, letting his own tears fall on Hugo's face for the last time.